Picture this. You're a part of the galaxy's greatest architects. The Keth Mori could build cities that floated like diamonds between stars, structures so beautiful they made grown beings weep. We're talking about buildings that defied physics, bridges that stretched between moons, and towers that seemed to grow like living trees but were made of crystal and light. Their home worlds looked like something out of a fairy tale, with spires that twisted up into the clouds and buildings that changed color with the seasons. For over 1,000 years, every major civilization in the galaxy came to the Keth Mori when they wanted something truly spectacular built. Need a space station that can house 10 million people? Call the Keth Mori. Want a city that floats in the clouds of a gas giant? The Keth Mori were your guys. They were artists first, engineers second, and they took incredible pride in creating things that weren't just functional, but absolutely gorgeous. Their children grew up learning to shape crystal with their bare hands, to understand how light moved through different materials, to see beauty in mathematical equations that most species couldn't even comprehend. Every Keth Mori was born with an innate understanding of structure and design that took other species decades of study to barely grasp. They didn't just build buildings. They created dreams made solid. But here's where everything went wrong. The galaxy's biggest empire, the hegemony, had been slowly taking over system after system for centuries. They were smart about it, too. They didn't just conquer, they convinced. They'd roll up to a planet and say, "Hey, join us voluntarily and keep doing what you do best. Just do it for us now." Most species saw which way the wind was blowing and signed up willingly. For the longest time, this worked perfectly with the Keth Mori. The hegemony needed beautiful administrative buildings, impressive monuments to their power, stunning capitals that would make subject species feel small and awed. The Keth Mori were happy to oblige. They built the hegemony some of the most incredible structures in galactic history, palaces that floated in impossible spirals, courts of justice that seemed carved from solid starlight. Then the hegemony's wars got bigger, more violent. They weren't just absorbing willing planets anymore. They were facing real resistance from species who'd rather die free than live under someone else's boot. And suddenly, the hegemony wasn't asking the Keth Mori to build beautiful things anymore. They wanted weapons factories, massive ones, facilities that could churn out warships by the thousands, orbital bombardment platforms, facilities for building planet-cracking superweapons, the kind of ugly, brutal industrial complexes that could supply a war machine bent on crushing anyone who dare resist. The Keth Mori leadership didn't even need to debate it. Their response was immediate and absolute. We don't build tools of war. We never have, and we never will. Not maybe later, or let's negotiate. Or how about we compromise and build some defensive structures instead? Just flat out no. We are artists and builders, not merchants of death. Find someone else. The hegemony was genuinely shocked. Nobody said no to them anymore. They offered bribes, entire star systems, wealth beyond imagination, seats on their ruling council. The Keth Mori didn't budge. They threatened economic sanctions, trade embargoes, diplomatic isolation. The Keth Mori shrugged and kept building beautiful, peaceful things for anyone who wanted them. Finally, the hegemony lost patience. If the Keth Mori wouldn't serve willingly, they'd be made an example of what happened to species who forgot their place in the new galactic order. The punishment was swift and absolutely brutal. Every Keth Mori ship was boarded, their hyperdrives ripped out and destroyed. Every world that had hosted Keth Mori communities was given an ultimatum: expel them immediately or face consequences. Within 6 months, nearly 2 million Keth Mori found themselves crammed into whatever ships they could find, stripped of their ability to travel faster than light, and formally exiled from every civilized world in the galaxy. But here's the thing that really twisted the knife. The hegemony didn't just exile them. They made sure everyone knew why. Across the galaxy, the message was clear. This is what happens when you refuse to serve the greater good. The Keth Mori chose their pride over practical cooperation, and now they drift in the void, dying slowly while their children suffer for their parents' stubbornness. Most species got the message loud and clear. Better to build weapons and live comfortable lives than to stick to principles and watch your people waste away in dying ships. For 3 generations, that's almost 90 years of Keth Mori, 2 million souls lived in deteriorating vessels. Their beautiful crystal cities became crowded, recycled air corridors. Their children grew up pale and weak under artificial lights, never seeing a real sun or breathing real atmosphere. The magnificent culture that had created wonders across the galaxy was slowly fading away in the cold emptiness between stars. The worst part wasn't the physical hardship, though that was terrible enough. It was watching their culture die. Young Kethmori, who should have been learning to shape crystal and bend light, were instead learning to patch hull breaches and ration water. Their incredible architectural knowledge was being forgotten, replaced by desperate survival skills. And through it all, they never once regretted their choice. Even as their ships broke down and their people suffered, not a single Kethmori ever suggested they should have built those weapons. They'd rather die free artists than live as enslaved weapons makers. That's the kind of people they were. And that's exactly why what happened next was so incredible. Fast forward 90 years of drifting through the void. The Kethmori flotilla was barely holding together. Ships that had once been marvels of engineering were now held together with patches, prayers, and sheer stubbornness. Their fuel reserves were almost gone, their life support systems failing one by one, and their population was slowly starving on dwindling supplies that were never meant to last this long. That's when their long-range sensors picked up something unexpected, a small blue world orbiting a yellow star in what the galactic maps marked as an empty backwater system. According to their databases, this planet Earth was inhabited by some primitive species that had barely figured out how to leave their own atmosphere. The kind of civilization that was maybe 1,000 years away from being considered worthy of galactic attention. For the Kethmori, it looked like their last hope. Not a great hope, mind you, but better than dying slowly in the empty space between stars. Maybe they could land quietly on this primitive world, find some corner where they wouldn't bother the locals, and at least let their children die under real sunlight instead of flickering artificial lights. The plan was simple. Approach carefully, avoid scaring the natives, find an empty continent somewhere, and fade away quietly. After 90 years of exile, the Kethmori had learned to keep their heads down and not expect much from the universe. What they got instead completely changed everything. Lieutenant Amy Clark was pulling the night shift at the Deep Space Monitoring Station in Colorado when her instruments started going crazy. The readings made no sense. Massive energy signatures, dozens of objects moving in formation, technology that was clearly not human. For a terrifying moment, she thought it might be some kind of invasion fleet. Then the distress signals started coming through. Now, humans in 2157 had been listening to space for over 2 centuries, hoping to hear something, anything, that would prove we weren't alone in the universe. We dreamed about first contact, written countless books and movies about meeting aliens, spent billions of dollars building bigger and better radio telescopes just in case someone out there is trying to talk to us. But nobody had really prepared for first contact to be a desperate cry for help from dying refugee ships. Amy's hands were shaking as she patched the signals through the Earth Defense Command. The audio was strange, filled with harmonics and frequencies that human ears could barely process. But the Universal Translator software was already working on it. What came to was heartbreaking. Please, anyone, children dying, life support failing, seeking sanctuary. Commander Tom Bradley had been expecting a quiet night. Earth defense was mostly about tracking space debris and coordinating with the mining stations on Mars. Alien contact protocols existed, sure, but they were theoretical exercises that nobody really expected to use. When Amy's call came through at 2:30 a.m., Tom was grabbing his third cup of coffee and wondering if the budget reports would ever end. Then he heard those signals, saw the readings showing dozens of massive ships limping toward Earth's outer system, and everything changed. Here's what's incredible about Tom's response. He didn't call for committee meetings. He didn't wait for approval from politicians or military brass. He didn't demand that the aliens identify themselves or prove they weren't hostile. His first words, recorded for history, were, "Jesus Christ, there are kids dying out there. Amy, get me every ship we've got. I don't care if they're military, civilian, or flying garbage trucks. If it can reach those ships, I want it moving in 10 minutes. Within an hour, Earth had scrambled every available spacecraft. Military vessels, research ships, cargo haulers, even tourist shuttles from the Luna City runs. Captain Lisa Zhang led the rescue fleet in the heavy cruiser Wellington, while Dr. Mike Foster loaded medical supplies onto anything that could fly. But here's the thing that really shows you what humans are made of. When the first rescue teams actually reached the Keth Mori ships and saw what they were dealing with, genuinely alien beings, technology beyond human understanding, refugees from conflicts we'd never heard of, there wasn't a single moment of hesitation. Rescue Coordinator Beth Wilson, floating in zero gravity next to a Keth Mori child who was clearly dying, didn't waste time wondering if this might be some kind of trick or whether these aliens might be dangerous. She just started working, using every bit of medical knowledge she had to try to help, even though she was dealing with biology, unlike anything in human textbooks. The thing is, humans had never met aliens before. We had no protocols for this, no established procedures, no idea what we were getting into. Our first instinct when faced with the unknown could have been fear, suspicion, or self-preservation. Instead, it was compassion. When Captain Rodriguez of the rescue ship Madrid reported back to Earth Command, his message was simple. "Sir, we've got refugee families out here. They're hurt, they're scared, and they need help. Requesting permission to bring them home." Tom Bradley's response became the foundation of everything that followed. "Permission granted. Captain, bring them all home. Earth's got room." And just like that, without committees or votes or diplomatic negotiations, humanity made its first major decision as a galactic species. When someone needs help, you help them. Period. It says something pretty incredible about our species that our first instinct wasn't what's in it for us, but how can we help? Now, here's where things got really complicated. Bringing 2 million alien refugees to Earth sounded noble and heroic, but the reality was absolutely chaotic. The Keth Mori weren't just different culturally. They were different biologically in ways that made integration seem nearly impossible. First off, they couldn't breathe our air. Not even close. Earth's atmosphere was basically poison to them. They needed a much higher concentration of certain gases that barely existed in our environment. Plus, their lung systems worked completely differently from ours. One breath of unfiltered Earth air would send a Keth Mori into respiratory failure within minutes. Then there was the communication problem. The Keth Mori didn't just speak, they sang. Their entire language was based on complex harmonic frequencies, some so high or low that human ears couldn't even detect them. Imagine trying to have a conversation with someone when half the words they're saying are literally invisible to your hearing. Basic communication was like trying to understand a symphony when you can only hear the drums. Their technology was even more incompatible. Human tech was all about circuits, electricity, and digital processing. Keth Mori technology was based on crystal resonance and harmonic manipulation. Trying to connect their systems to ours was like plugging a violin into a computer and expecting it to run software. It just didn't work. And that's not even getting into the panic that was spreading across Earth. The news media went absolutely crazy. Headlines screamed about alien invasion by stealth, and unknown diseases that could wipe out humanity. Conspiracy theorists were having a field day, claiming this was all part of some elaborate plot to weaken Earth's defenses. Social media was flooded with videos of Keth Mori refugees that people filmed without permission, usually focusing on how strange and alien they looked. Dr. Helen Foster, head of the Center for Disease Control, was working around the clock trying to calm public fears about contamination. The problem was nobody knew what diseases a Keth Mori might be carrying or whether human diseases could affect them. Early medical tests were terrifying. Their biology was so different that standard medical equipment couldn't even get proper readings. Meanwhile, economists were running the numbers and having panic attacks. 2 million refugees meant housing, food, medical care, education. The costs were astronomical. Senator Robert Hayes went on television calling it the most expensive humanitarian disaster in human history, and demanding to know who was going to pay for it all. But here's where humanity really showed its true colors. Dr. Amy Wilson from MIT took one look at the atmospheric compatibility problem and didn't see an impossible challenge. She saw the most interesting engineering puzzle of her lifetime. Her team started working 18-hour days, designing hybrid atmospheric systems that could create breathable zones for both species. They built modular units that could be installed in existing buildings, creating Kethmori-friendly spaces without having to reconstruct entire cities. Professor Jack Davies from Oxford had been studying whale songs and dolphin communication his entire career. When he heard Kethmori harmonic speech for the first time, his response wasn't confusion. It was excitement. He understood that this was language, just expressed in frequencies humans had never used for communication. Within weeks, his team had developed the first harmonic-to-verbal translation devices. They were clunky at first, making conversation sound like robot poetry, but they worked. The real heroes, though, were ordinary people who just started showing up. Linda Martinez, a nurse from Phoenix, took vacation days to volunteer at the refugee processing centers, learning basic Kethmori physiology, so she could help with medical care. Kevin Thompson, a construction worker from Detroit, spent weekends helping to modify buildings for Kethmori families, figuring out how to install atmospheric systems in apartment complexes. Sarah Bradley started a neighborhood group in Seattle that paired human families with Kethmori refugees, helping them navigate everything from grocery shopping to public transportation. Within months, there were thousands of these volunteer groups across every major city on Earth. But the most amazing thing was that the Kethmori weren't just passive recipients of human charity. They started giving back in ways that transformed both species. Elder Kethmori architects began teaching human engineers their construction techniques. Suddenly, human cities were getting buildings that seemed to grow organically from the landscape, structures that were both incredibly strong and breathtakingly beautiful. The first hybrid building, constructed in Geneva with both human and Kethmori techniques, looked like a crystal tree that had been carved by wind and water over centuries. Young Kethmori, who learned human engineering principles, started creating things nobody had imagined possible. They built bridges that sang in the wind, creating different harmonies depending on weather conditions. They designed parks where the walkways and plant arrangements created natural acoustic amphitheaters, places where human music and Kethmori harmonic communication could blend together. The cultural exchange was incredible. Human artists started incorporating Kethmori harmonic principles into their music, creating compositions that could be appreciated by both species. Kethmori artists began using human color theory in their crystal sculptures, creating works that played with light in ways that made viewers from both species stop and stare in wonder. Within 2 years, Earth's major cities had completely transformed. You could walk through downtown Vancouver and see apartment buildings that looked like they'd been grown rather than built. Hear music drifting from parks that mix human instruments with Kethmori harmonic singing, and watch children from both species playing games that neither species had imagined before first contact. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect, but it worked because humans decided that making it work was worth whatever effort it took. 2 years of peaceful integration had changed everything. Earth's cities now hummed with a blend of human energy and Kethmori harmony. Kids from both species played together in parks that sang with the wind. Scientists were collaborating on projects that neither species could have imagined alone. For the first time in nearly a century, Kethmori children were growing up strong and healthy under real sunlight. Then everything went sideways. Lieutenant David Mitchell was monitoring the deep space sensors from Luna Station when the readings started coming in. Massive energy signatures dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. Ships bigger than anything in Earth's fleet, moving in perfect formation, broadcasting identification codes that made David's blood run cold. The hegemony had found them. Admiral Kate Johnson was at a meeting about new colony ships when the alert came through. She'd been expecting this day for 2 years, had nightmares about it. But seeing those massive warships on her tactical display still hit her like a punch to the gut. 12 dreadnoughts, each one the size of a small city, backed by dozens of cruisers and destroyers. The kind of fleet that could reduce Earth's defenses to space debris in under an hour. The message came through on all frequencies, broadcast in perfect English that somehow made it even more terrifying. The voice was calm, almost bored, like someone reading a grocery list. Greetings, primitive humans of Earth. We are representatives of the hegemony of suns. You are harboring criminals who were legally exiled for crimes against galactic stability. You have 72 hours to surrender all Kethmori individuals to our custody for proper processing. Failure to comply will result in corrective measures. This is not a negotiation. The corrective measures part was accompanied by a demonstration. One of their smaller ships fired a single beam at an asteroid about the size of Manhattan. The asteroid didn't just explode. It simply ceased to exist, vaporized so completely that there wasn't even debris left behind. President Lisa Taylor was in the Oval Office reviewing trade agreements when her chief of staff burst in with the news. The room filled up quickly. Secretary of Defense Michael Roberts, Joint Chiefs Chairman General Patricia Davis, Director of Intelligence Brian Clark. Everyone was talking at once, running numbers, calculating odds, discussing options. The math was brutal. Earth's entire military consisted of maybe 200 ships, most of them designed for patrol duty and asteroid mining protection. The humans had fusion drives and railguns, maybe some experimental laser weapons. Impressive by human standards, but compared to hegemony technology, they might as well be throwing rocks. General Davis laid it out bluntly. Madam President, we're looking at a technological gap of maybe 500 years. Their smallest escort ship has more firepower than our entire fleet combined. If they want to demonstrate what happens to planets that don't cooperate, we can't stop them. Secretary Roberts was already pulling up evacuation plans. We could move critical infrastructure to the Mars colonies, maybe get some of the population to the outer system. It wouldn't save everyone, but we could preserve human civilization. Intelligence Director Clark had been quietly running projections on his tablet. Ma'am, if we look at historical hegemony responses to defiance, they typically make examples. Orbital bombardment, targeting population centers, systematic destruction of industrial capacity. Based on their previous actions, we're looking at casualties in the hundreds of millions. The room went quiet. Everyone was looking at President Taylor, waiting for the only decision that made sense. The reasonable choice. The smart choice. Hand over to Keth Mori, apologize profusely for harboring criminals, and hope the hegemony would be satisfied with just taking the refugees. Instead, President Taylor stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the Washington, D.C. skyline, where human and Keth Mori architecture now blended together in impossible beauty. After a long moment, she turned back to the room. Get me a direct line to every broadcast network on Earth. All of them. Emergency presidential address in 1 hour. Her staff exchanged worried glances. General Davis cleared her throat. Ma'am, what exactly are you planning to tell them? The truth, Patricia. I'm going to tell them the truth. An hour later, President Taylor appeared on every screen on Earth. Her message was broadcast in dozens of languages, including the harmonic frequencies that the Keth Mori could understand. But the words she spoke were simple enough for a child to comprehend. My fellow humans and our Keth Mori friends, today, we receive a demand from the hegemony of suns. They want us to surrender the refugees who have become our neighbors, our friends, our family. They threaten to destroy our world if we refuse. She paused, looking directly into the camera. Here's my response. Earth is a sanctuary world. Anyone fleeing oppression has a home here. That's not negotiable. That's not up for debate. That's who we are. The reaction across Earth was immediate and overwhelming. In New York, crowds gathered in Times Square, chanting their support. In Tokyo, millions of people lit candles in a massive vigil. In London, the Houses of Parliament erupted in the longest standing ovation in British history. But the most incredible response came from the Keth Mori themselves. Elder architect Zeth Mari, speaking through harmonic translators, addressed the human population. For 90 years, we drifted in darkness, forgotten by the galaxy. You brought us into the light. Today, we stand with Earth. We will not hide while our friends face destruction for protecting us. The hegemony was monitoring Earth's communications, expecting panic, perhaps riots demanding the government hand over the aliens to save human lives. Instead, they witnessed something they'd never seen before. An entire species united in defiance, choosing to risk everything rather than abandon their adopted family. Admiral Vorthcan, commanding the hegemony fleet, couldn't believe the readings his intelligence officers were showing him. You're telling me these primitives are willing to face extinction rather than surrender criminals they barely know? Yes, sir. Analysis shows no significant opposition to their leader's decision. If anything, support appears to be strengthening. The hegemony thought they were dealing with naive primitives who would fold the moment they realized what they were up against. They were about to learn why you don't mess with a species that adopts strays and calls them family. The battle lasted 3 days, but honestly, the real fight was already won before the first shot was ever fired. Here's what the hegemony didn't know. For 2 years, humans hadn't just been helping the Kethmori settle on Earth. We've been doing something much more dangerous. We've been talking, not to governments or official channels, but to ordinary people across the galaxy. Captain Jennifer Hayes had started it almost by accident. She was commanding a deep space communication array, and during quiet shifts, she'd begun broadcasting simple messages into the void. Basic stuff. This is Earth. If you're listening, if you're running from something, if you need help, we're here. Just a lonely human voice reaching out to whoever might be listening in the darkness between stars. Those messages spread. Other humans picked up the idea. Dr. Mark Stevens, working on quantum communication experiments, began bouncing signals off cosmic phenomena to reach distant systems. Teacher Beth Wilson started having her students record messages of welcome in dozens of languages, broadcasting them toward known inhabited worlds. The response was incredible, but it came slowly, carefully. Species that everyone thought were completely crushed by the hegemony began sending back whispered messages. The Veltar, whose entire civilization had been reduced to mining slaves, managed to smuggle out recordings describing their situation. The Zephyrians, supposedly extinct for 50 years, revealed they'd been hiding in asteroid fields, keeping their culture alive in secret. Most importantly, the galaxy was watching when President Taylor made her stand. Every species under hegemony rule saw a young, technologically inferior civilization choose certain destruction rather than betray refugees they'd known for just 2 years. The message was powerful. If these primitive humans were willing to die for strangers, what did that say about the rest of us who've been serving the hegemony out of convenience? When the hegemony fleet finally moved to attack position, expecting to find a frightened planet begging for mercy, they got the shock of their existence. Admiral Vortkin was reviewing his attack plans when his sensor officer's voice cracked with disbelief. "Sir, we're detecting hyperspace signatures. Multiple contacts dropping out of FDL across the system." At first, they assumed it was human reinforcements, maybe some hidden fleet that Earth had kept secret. But the ships that began materializing weren't human designs. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, commanding Earth's defense fleet from the carrier Washington, watched in amazement as the tactical display filled up with contacts. Ships she'd never seen before, designs that clearly weren't human, but broadcasting friendly identification codes. The first arrivals were Veltar mining vessels, converted into makeshift warships. Their message was simple: Earth welcomes strangers. We welcome Earth. Behind them came Zephyrian fighters, thought extinct but apparently very much alive and very angry about 50 years of hiding. But that was just the beginning. The Kithera emerged from the asteroid belt where they'd been secretly building ships for decades. The Moldavi brought a fleet they'd been hiding in the gas giants' moons. The Cerati, supposedly loyal hegemony subjects, arrived with half their merchant marine converted to combat ships. Within 6 hours, the hegemony's overwhelming fleet found itself facing an armada that matched their numbers and was growing by the hour. Species from across the galaxy, many carrying grudges spanning generations, had finally found someone crazy enough to make the first stand. Dr. Amy Wilson, working from the Earth Defense Command bunker, coordinated with Kethmori architects to create something the galaxy had never seen before, a combined defense network that turned Earth's orbital space into a maze of energy barriers and defensive platforms. Human innovation merged with alien expertise, creating defenses that were both practical and beautiful. The actual fighting was intense but brief. The hegemony had expected to crush a primitive world, and instead found themselves facing a coalition of species they thought were completely under control. More importantly, they were fighting people who weren't just defending territory. They were defending an idea. General Patricia Davis, commanding ground-based offenses, watched the tactical displays with growing amazement. They're not just fighting for Earth, she told her staff. They're fighting for the right to have somewhere to run to. On the second day, something unprecedented happened. Hegemony ships began switching sides. Crews that served the Empire for generations suddenly found themselves asking why they were fighting to destroy the first sanctuary world the galaxy had ever seen. By the third day, Admiral Vortkan was facing not just external enemies, but internal rebellion. His own crews were questioning orders, his officers were having second thoughts, and his support fleet was melting away as ship after ship declared for the coalition. The hegemony withdrew, but the damage was done. Across their empire, worlds that served faithfully for centuries were suddenly asking uncomfortable questions. If these young humans were willing to risk everything for strangers, what does that make us for serving oppressors? The revolution that followed wasn't violent. It was something much more powerful. It was millions of beings across hundreds of worlds simply deciding they didn't want to live in an empire built on fear anymore. Earth became what President Taylor had declared it to be, the first sanctuary world in galactic history. The only law that mattered was beautifully simple. If the universe threw you away, you belong here now. The Keth Mori had found more than a new home. They'd found a people who understood that real strength isn't about conquest or domination. It's about having the courage to tell the unwanted that they're wanted, the exiled that they're welcome, the forgotten that they're remembered. And sometimes that kind of strength can change an entire galaxy.